Just start with some of the why we're here. That's always important. Some those that are in social services, MDS, they're familiar with the PHQ-9 as well as the BIMS. Those assessments that are part of the MDS assessment, a part of the actual MDS assessment. So over the last year, we have some information just regarding how we're documenting the information and the feedback. So when we're talking today, we're specifically talking about the first initial assessment that goes along with PDPM. Now, this will apply moving forward. The information that we're going to provide, I know that initially we are used to as a culture of our company, and some of you may have been trained at other companies as well, using the resident assessment alone. With the support of the actual RAI manual, today we're going to show how to get a better picture, a more accurate picture of the resident's mood, depression, by using the clinical record as well as staffing interviews. So Tara actually has some data for Nexion and what we're doing with our PHQ-9, as well as what the national average is saying.
Thanks, Cole. So speaking to the why, we should just take a moment and celebrate that we're not talking about COVID-19 for a change. And we can get back to some operationally sound projects. And so obviously, census has been one all along, and now we're needing to take a deeper dive at our revenue. And one of those important categories is our Part A PDPM rates. And, we started PDPM the fourth quarter of 2019. Somebody may need to mute, I'm not sure. And the very next quarter was COVID. So we've really just sort of flown through PDPM through a pandemic. So one of the really important areas that we talked about when we first started PDPM was depression coding and its impact on our rates. And, as Cole and Kendra are going to talk about today, the PHQ-9 and BIMS and the importance of those items and how it influences our ability to capture the accuracy clinical representation of our residents. But there is a revenue component to that too. So frequently we use national databases to do comparisons between our performance and the rest of the country, which is really important so that we can have a measuring stick of, are we missing opportunities? And we are actually missing quite a few opportunities to represent our residents clinically in the area of the PHQ-9 and implications of mood and depression. Why is this important? Well, the statistics show that PDPM, the capture of the depression in split, which I'll show you in just a second, equates to roughly a $30 to $33 per day increase in your rate. So that's a pretty large amount of money. And if you remember, those first 3 days of your PDPM are paid at 300%. So multiply 33 times 3, and you're almost at $100 a day more for those first 3 days. So when we were looking at, okay, well, that's big money. Have we just clinically represented our residents correctly and, we're not missing anything? Well, nationally, the depression in split is captured roughly 17% of the time. So I'm going to show you a graphic of what it looks like for us and how frequently we've actually captured it. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All right. Can you guys see that chart? I can't see y'all, so I want to make sure. Okay, I see your head nodding, Cole. Okay, So the data I'm showing you is straight out of TSI. Every one of you have access to this information. It's under the PDPM distribution report. When you drill down to the nursing component, there's 5 areas to drill down to. The nursing component, you will get a bar graph that looks just like this. So depending on your time frame you choose, you'll see the distribution of your residents and where they fell in each of the nursing categories for the nursing CMG that builds the PDPM rate. And what we are looking for are between the N's here, we have between the P's and the S's, we have these number 2s at the N split. So LDE2, LBC2, and so on. Those are very tiny bars. You can see that across here. When you add up all of these percentages, that would be those individuals we did trigger for the mood depression in splint as a yes, and they'll explain what that looks like when we look at the PHQ-9. We captured it 7.4% of our population with the in-splint. Now remember, the national average is 17%. So that's the very first quarter of PDPM. Well, if we go and we look at how we did in 2020, so if we just look at Q2 through Q4, our capture of the depression in-splint actually decreased to only 4.9% of the time. Now, I chose Q2 to Q4 because that was our COVID-19 phase 1 through 3. And what happened to our residents? They became isolated. They were made to stay in their rooms. Some of them had COVID, ended up on COVID units. Do you think our population probably experienced some increased mood changes and possibly demonstrated some depression? So logically, we would see that should have probably increased versus decrease, and then keeping in mind that the average is 17%. So then if we look at 2021, we went down even further. So now we're only capturing it roughly around 4.3% of the time. So the message is we are leaving revenue on the table, but more importantly, we are potentially not representing the full clinical picture of our residents that we're caring for and have been caring for through a pandemic now for 2 straight years. So there's the revenue why, there's the clinical representation why, and now I'll turn it back to Cole and Kendra, who are going to share with you how we can navigate to potentially better outcomes clinically and financially.
Okay, thank you, Tara, for sharing that with us. So our next why, you may be asking, why am I here? We have different departments. We ask for the PDPM IDT to be present. Activities directors, MDS, DORs, and DONs are on the calls. So why are we here? We're going to figure out how we all play a role in making sure that it's accurate. I understand that most people are looking at this as a social service thing, but a couple of things that we run into operational. What if I don't have a social worker? What if the social worker didn't get to this assessment? So the other purpose of this, and we also have activities here as a backup plan. This is an assessment that can be done. It does not require a social worker to do. It requires for the individuals to be trained on it. So that's why we have the activities as a backup just for us operationally. They don't have as many assessments, and they do have to go in and already do interviews. So that would be a great backup plan for your facility to have on these particular assessments. Not every social service part of the MDS can they do, but these 2 particular assessments, because the instructions are there, the questions are there, you're not deviating from that. They are capable and they're able to do that as a backup. Also, the other portion of it, because we're looking at the first 3 days of representation for us as a company, we were using this interview as
Oh, you're muted all of a sudden. You're muted.
It keeps kicking me back off. Can you hear me now? It's muting by itself. Did you hear me or no?
We heard first 3 days, and then I
Okay.
think you went mute.
Okay. So we're looking at that first 3 days that are very critical. However, the PHQ-9 assessment is actually over the last 2 weeks. It's a review of 14 days. So if the person has been in our facility 1 to 3 days, how do we get that information? So that's what the other why of being here. How do we get that information and not make anyone feel like, am I doing something that's not ethically okay because the resident didn't say that? Some of us have asked questions like the resident has answered no to I'm depressed, but I know that the resident is not depressed based on XYZ factors. Let's say they're not eating. The resident says, I eat every day, and we put a 0. So what we've been seeing on a lot of the PHQ-9 assessments is zeros going straight down because we're using the resident's interview alone. But what the PHQ-9, what the RAI manual actually says, and Kendra, if you would prompt it to on the RAI manual D0500, and it is on page D11. As she gets that pulled up, I'm basically going to explain to you. I just want to make sure that you know that it's actually in the RAI manual. This actually says that we can use the clinical record because it is documented, and that's a representation of the resident. We can also use the staff and the family in the interview process. So in this 3 days, what we need to do, and prior to the resident getting there, because we have the paperwork, right? As a team, we need to go ahead and look through that paperwork as we're finding the other things and get the information that's going to support the PHQ-9. So this is going to be happening prior to even seeing that resident. Of course, you're going to ask the questions. It requires you to ask those questions, but this is more of a checkpoint at this process because in your clinical note or in your summary, after you complete the assessment, you're going to be adding information obtained from the clinical record. The PHQ-9 also states all residents must be interviewed. This is not contingent to Section B that says that they're moderately or impaired cognitively. It's not. It's not contingent. They said all residents should be interviewed. However, if the resident, if it's a nonsensical response, if it's a refusal, after 3, you're allowed to go to the staff interview at that point. So every resident, you should attempt the residents on the PHQ-9 assessment. It should be an attempt. At that time, if their answers, because they're confused, does not match, because they don't want to answer it, because they want you to get out of the room, if it's 3 of those refusals or nonsensical answers, you are prompted to go to the staff interview at that time. What you should do to this section is not put dashes ever on this assessment. You should put 9s. It's going to be a 9-9, and then you will go down to the staff interview. So that's just some of the top of the morning type of things with the PHQ-9. I think this is going to be the biggest impact. And I wanted you to keep putting in your mind, we're talking about the first assessment of the PHQ-9, right? Everybody got that? We're good on that? It's going to be the first assessment that goes along with the PDPM. This practice will move forward, but this is the time that we're focusing on what does the clinical chart say? And if I went to the nurse because I felt something different, the resident told me, hey, I have slept great in the last 14 days. 0. That's what we're going to get. But we know that we heard in morning meeting that the resident was up all night. They were screaming, they were yelling, they were doing all of these other things. We can use that information. So if at that time you heard it in the morning meeting and it's only on the 24-hour nurses report, at that time as a team, and that's why we want the whole team, when we're having the PDPM, get someone to write it down so it becomes a part of the clinical chart. So in your meetings, you should have that information, these assessments to look at, to know what we're looking for. That has to be a part of our operations. Um, from here, if we can get it up, if we can get up the actual assessment. Oh, I think Kendra's having some technical problems. If we can get up the actual PHQ-9, we can go over that process. Or Tara, if you can get it up, that would be helpful, and we will go and just look at it, so we're not just talking about a fictional thing at this point.
Can you see my screen?
I cannot.
Is your camera on, Kendra?
No, it's not on. Once I click out of it, it doesn't. It says it's sharing.
I think your camera will have to be on to share, right?
Okay, what about now?
No. Okay, as we're working on that, I'm gonna just go ahead because I want to be respectful of you guys' time. The PHQ-9 is a mood interview, and it's conducted of 9 questions, hence the 9. At the ending of the number is the number, actually the number of questions that you're asking to the resident. Our social workers are very familiar, so is the MDS. Some of these questions could be very uncomfortable, which is why at sometimes you may or may not get an accurate answer. And the reason I'm saying that, one of the questions asks you about your sleep pattern. If you ask me about my sleep pattern, just lifelong, it's a good night if I had 4 hours of sleep. That's normal for me. So if you ask me about if I haven't slept well in the last 2 weeks, I may only account for the 2 nights that I only slept 2 hours, right? So for me, when I answer those questions, you're probably going to get a severity score of a 1, instead of a 3 happening 14 days or within a time frame 7 to 14 days. However, if I have a roommate or if I have a nurse who I kept up all week with my light because I'm searching and writing things and doing crafting at that time, they may have a different view of my sleeping pattern. So that's just an example of how the support of those who are in observation, family, because keep in mind, these are the first 3 days the resident is with us. They were in the hospital before that. So that information may be coming from the hospital. It may be coming from families when they were at home. And it may be coming from feedback from a roommate or the nurse or the staff. But again, if it is coming from the staff, we're asking you to make sure that that's documented so it's supported in the clinical record. So the very top of the PHQ-9, it did come up, but I think it jumped back off.
Okay, you could see it. I'll share it again if you could see it. Sorry.
Okay. The first section is basically asking if the resident rarely or never understands. If the resident rarely to never understand, you're going to mark 0, and it's going to automatically take you to the staff interview. If it is yes, which means you're able to interview them, not if they're interviewable. These are the people that you initially put in section C as rarely to never understand. And that's the BIMS that you already put on the BIMS that they rarely to never understand. So these particular individuals, even if they were a score of a 6, we're going to still be interviewing them. So we're going to go to yes. The next portion of this assessment, the resident mood interview, has a 2-column section. If you can see, the first section is the symptom is present. So this is basically a yes or no. So if you look under the one at the very top of the, um, at the very top left, yes, right there, it shows you. So a no would be a 0 and a yes would be a 1. So that's all this first column of symptoms are present is asking. So if I went into your room and Miss Kendra, in the last 2 weeks, have you had little interest or pleasure in doing things? If you tell me yes, I'm putting a 1. If you tell me no, I'm putting a 0. Then I'm going to ask you how frequently that happens. So for me personally, it gives you the breakdown of the days. It says 2 to 6 days, 7 to 11 days, 2 to 14 days. I would ask you not to use days simply because it's confusing. You would spend more time trying to figure out the days, and the resident will as well, versus saying, which is in parentheses, several of the days as 2 to 6 days, 7 to 11, half or more of the days, or 12 to 14, nearly every day. So how that sounds, I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Kendra, in the last 2 weeks, have you had little interest or pleasure in doing things? If she tells me yes, would that be some of the days, half the days, or just about every day? So if I do that in a more communication, flow of a conversation, then we're just getting down to when it happened. So if you say half of those days, then I'm able, if you look into the charting, that's going to be a 2. You follow the same process with each one of those questions. So I do ask you, as you see, some of the questions have commas, so they're asking multiple things. So on B, in the last 2 weeks, um, have you been feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? If you tell me yes, I'm going to say some of the days, half of the days, or just about every day. Now, for me, after they give me my answer, whether it is nearly every day, I'm going to ask which one of those are feeling, or they all, or is it all? Because that's what I want to put in my note of what they're feeling. Am I feeling more down? Do I see it as depressed, or do I see it as hopelessness? So if you see commas, then you want to get a little bit of clarity, or if you see an and or in this assessment, you want to kind of clarify where we're going in that. So in your initial summary, you're going to have the information to support the actual resident's interview. However, I'm not going to read the whole thing because you guys can read. That's just the format of it. However, I'm going to do an or question, um, and that is going to be, Kendra, in the last 2 weeks, have you had a poor appetite or overeating? You tell me yes. Some of the days, half the days, just about every day. You tell me some of the days. So that's going to be a score of 2. I have to clarify. Are you eating more, or you're eating less? Or is it a poor appetite, or do you feel like you're eating too much? Now on this assessment, you are prompted to read exactly what's on the assessment. However, once you read it, for the integrity of the assessment, you cannot deviate from initially asking. However, if the resident does not understand, you can probe. You can say, do you feel like you're not eating enough, or you feel like you're eating too much, to get clarity? But that's only after you've already asked it, as the form reads. So that's just to clarify, people, because this is the assessment that they want us to use. We do initially have to read it as it has written. However, if there is confusion for your resident in the probing section, the next section, to get more clarity, there are terms, as long as they're interchangeable, that you're able to use. So are you eating too much or not eating enough, for that clarity? Now, this particular question, and Janet Johnson gives an example. If you have someone who is, struggling with their weight, or they're looked at as obese, or see themselves as obese, they're probably not going to say I overeat. And that's again where we're prompted to look in the medical chart, or now at this point, how have they been eating in the last 3 days? Well, I'm not eating. You know, I have all zeros, but then the dietary is saying they've ordered 3 or 4 extra trays, or like, to just get a good gauge of, again, this clinical IDT team getting the information that is needed to support this assessment. I'm going to skip down to I, and I'm going to say I, even though I said activities directors can do this assessment, I do ask that on I, thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself in some way be done by clinical staff. It could be the nurse, it can be the MBS coordinator, but that particular question, just because it's prompted, if they say yes, it's prompted to do some more clinical interactions at that point. I do ask that you assess for a plan for suicide if that is the case. I do, no, it is mandatory that you definitely let the nurse and leadership know that this person is saying, if they're saying they're suicidal. However, this question could be misinterpreted as well, and that's why you want to this question you have to clarify. Thoughts that I would be better off dead or hurting myself in some way. Even if they said yes, you have to go back because it has a comma and an or. So is it I'm better off dead or harming myself? If it's I'm better off dead, we need to clarify, is that because you're tired and hopeless because of the situation you're in, or you really want to harm yourself to die? So on that particular question, I prefer that is done by someone that is clinical, so we can follow our protocol on what we need to do if a resident is suicidal or having the thoughts. But we do want to look at plan and intent whenever we're prompted there. Sometimes I ask if they have a roommate, any thoughts of harming anyone else, but that's not related to the assessment, just because if we already in that state, that could be possible. But I did come from MHMR, so that's just probably a skill set that I have incorporated over the years. So anyone have any questions on symptoms present and symptoms frequency? Or anything that I've gone over at this point? No. I can keep going. So,
I have a question.
Okay.
What if this person, in an example of overeating, we all know that the resident is overeating, but however, the percentages in the chart doesn't match that person overeating, but all the clinical staff is aware of it. How do I represent that on the PHQ 9 on that question?
You're asking the staff to document that, because if they all know it, and that's what we're saying in the initial, this is going to cause for communication amongst your IDT team, but it would help you if you're doing the initial PDPM in that first meeting, bring that charge nurse in, ask the questions, and you can get it, and have them just to make sure that they're documenting this is what they saw, and it's factual, it's clinical, it did happen. Even if they told you no, it is allowing you to take that information. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
I see a hand raised, Lily Springs. Did you have a question?
She put the question in the chat box, Cole. It says she's a social worker, but I was an MCOT worker before. Here, am I fine to handle 9 by myself? She doesn't have a mic, she said.
Okay, tell us what those acronyms mean. MC, tell us what that means.
I'll let you know when she puts it in the box, Cole, if you want to keep going for now.
So to answer her question, regardless of what that means, yes, she can do all 9 by herself. But what we run into is when facilities do not have social workers, it's dashes down this whole assessment. People are not doing them, or it's not prompting for you because it's not a social worker present, or maybe you went out on vacation. We need a backup plan because it needs to be done. Like, we have to get it done. So all dashes down. Um, Even if you put 9s and you don't have the staff assessment, that's not okay. That's not okay. We should be completing this assessment in totality to really, it's an ethical obligation to represent who the resident is clinically in the chart, because that's what the MDS is. It's the paper version of the resident. So I should be able to pick this document up and get a picture of who I'm working with. So that's why. So yes, you could absolutely, we recommend it. We prefer it be the social worker, but we're trying to work through some operational barriers that may be a reason why it has not been completed. So we're saying, yes, the activities director absolutely can be the backup. If you have a receptionist that is good at interviewing, they can be the backup as long as they're trained. I will train them. We can get back on another training. If you have someone else in the building, we can do that. We're just saying it's not okay to not have this assessment complete. So as a team, you come up with a plan. Any other questions?
Ms. Cole, just to let you know, an MCOT is a mobile crisis outreach team, and they usually are with like Camino Real or something along those lines.
Okay. So they're coming out and just like behavioral health. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that explanation. I think we come something different, but I like the acronym. So the other portion of this, just moving down after the assessment, it's cut off on yours, Kendra, so I think you may have to go to the next page. It's going to give you a D300, which is actually the total severity score. It's a part of that same assessment, but it's explaining how we get the score on the PHQ 9. There's 9 questions. 3 is the highest you can get. So 9 times 3 gives you 27. That's it. Go back down on page on page 8. It shows a little block in the middle of it. Go up some, go up some, go up some. Yeah, right there, right there. So that's the bottom portion of the assessment. So it is showing you, so from 0 to 7 in the 0 to 27 in the second column, what those things mean. And I'm going to read them all. I thought I had them written down so you wouldn't have to go backwards. Okay. So what those scores mean from 1 to 4. Now, this is not diagnosing anyone. It's not diagnosis. It's saying between the 14 days, these symptoms are present. It is not saying that I am giving a diagnosis of depression. So if they were to score from a 1 to 4, that's minimal depression. From a 5 to 9, mild depression. From a 10 to 14, moderate depression. From a 15 to 19, moderately severe depression. And from a 20 to 27, it is severe depression. So that being said, if you think about the information that Tara provided, we as a company, even during COVID, only had about 7% of people that didn't even show it, that showed at just moderate depression. And if we know the reality of that, and I think this is going to be one of those things that quickly changes, because now we're going to be able to use a clinical record. And before we were just using the resident's voice alone. But we're able now, and we see that the RAI Manual supports that we're using that clinical record. So I suspect that this is something that if we're doing that, what I call a chart dive or search, getting that information, and really, like I said, a good piece for your PDPM. That initial new resident has come in, invite the charge nurse in there, or asked about the 24-hour report, did they sleep, or put some of those indicators to the 24-hour report, like let me know if the night nurse, or let me know at mealtime how this new person is eating. Another component that we miss out a lot on, an opportunity, is your therapy team. Social workers, like your speech therapist, has probably done an assessment similar. It's also going to tell you about their eating, a lot of those things. So please use their documentation. Don't just look at what happened in the hospital and the clinical. It may be information also in the therapy notes. So therapy, as you're looking through those things, make sure that if it's things that we can use, that we're talking about them in the meeting. So having an assessment present will be very, very helpful at that time. So back to the severity score, 0 to 27 on the score. If you see at the bottom, remember at the top when I said the 3 or more, blank, it's actually a little reminder that's built in. So if that person refuses 3 questions, if it's nonsensical answers, that prompts you to put, and it says there, enter a 99 and go ahead and go on to the staffing interview. The staff interview is exactly like the resident interview, except it's actually 10 questions. It has one more question, and that's J, and it asked about the resident being short-tempered or easily annoyed. So just remember that you can actually score up to a 30 on the staff interview. It doesn't change the category much, other than 20 to 30 is severe depression indicated based on this assessment. The only other thing I just want to go over, any question before I say that? No, yes. Okay. The only other thing I want to say to the social workers specifically, if you think about this as our first assessment, what do we do when we initially get a resident? We have a social service history, we have advanced directives, and we have the MDS. So that's a lot of things to go over in a short period of time with our residents. And as we know, as we try to do, if we get someone face to face, we want to get the information. It's very difficult to leave and come back, because residents go to dialysis, they're asleep, they're in therapy, they went to activities, they're overeating meal service. So you'll go back so many times trying to get the information. So what I would like for you to do before the resident gets cranky, after you do your social service initial history, go ahead and do these 2 assessments. Even before you do section B, go ahead, do these 2 assessments, PHQ 9 and the BIMS. Before we did have some discussion on the BIMS, where we were thinking at that time that the number 9 for our company was going to be the magic number to prompt us to a staffing interview. But after I found the RAI Manual says interview everybody, I talked to Mira, and we're going to go with the number 6. If your BIMS is below the number 6, we're asking for you to have a staff interview to support that. We're not going to go over that form, because everybody is known as the blue sock bed lady. When they see you coming, they already know what you're asking. But we're saying if they have really low scores of 6 on there, that we use the staff interview for that particular assessment. This assessment requires you to initially ask all residents, except the ones who are pretty much in the rarely to never understood. Those are the only residents that it's going to automatically push you to a 9. Everyone else, you're required to ask the questions ask the questions of the assessment. Anybody else have any questions? Tara or Kendra, you have anything else?
I do want to have just 3 participation questions. If you would just put your comment in the box, your answer in the comment box, and I'm just going to do just 3. So, can you use staff and family for information of the PHQ-9? Just put your question in the comment box. Can you use staff and family for information for the PHQ-9? Okay, awesome. I'm seeing a lot of yeses, and yes, that is correct. And that is in the RAI manual. All right, here's the next question. Can a resident who is unable to complete the PHQ-9 have a mood disorder still? Let's say they can't complete the PHQ-9, can they still have a mood disorder? This is directly off the RAI manual. Yes, they still can have a mood disorder. Yes. All right, here's my last question. It is your responsibility to accurately represent the resident clinically on the assessment. So making every effort to ensure the assessment is accurately represented. That is correct. Yes. So with the pandemic, with all the things that's going on, if you need any further assistance, please reach out. But I'm going to give it back to Cole or Tara. You guys did great.
I just was going to add, Cole, some of the things that Janet mentioned, making sure that the hospital packets are getting uploaded to PCC so that we can do that deep chart dive you mentioned, because most of the time our residents are going to have 10 to 12 days. They weren't even in our site, so we're going to be dependent on chart reviews of hospitalization documentation, or even calling the hospital. Look at the therapy notes in the hospital, how motivated or unmotivated were they to participate, and to just simply remember these people are in a nursing home now for rehab. And so in some way, shape, or form, that's traumatic all by itself. So, you know, their lives have been upturned. Maybe they were in an accident. Maybe they lost a loved one. Maybe they've just simply lost all control. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're stressed because their loved ones are stressed. So there's all of these factors about the event that they've gone through to require a skilled nursing stay that will contribute to their mood disorders and possibly having had a bad experience while they were in the hospital. So that's why that 2-week look back is so important. And now knowing we can interview others to gather the correct clinical picture is really, really important. And then just making sure we get it documented. That's all I was going to add.
Thank you, Tara and Kendra, both, just for your support and being able to get this information out to everyone. I think this would make, like I said, I'm excited because I think it makes it an easier way to gather information, because you can actually, if you have hospital paperwork prior to the resident getting there, you can go ahead and look at that information and be getting some of these answers. So that alone is already giving you good in such a short window of a 3-day. And even because I'm an old school social worker, I started in nursing home when tiles were changing into 2.0, and now we're at 3.0. It can even help you with your social service assessment, those kind of information that at times we frustrate the resident, because over this short period of time they have been transitioned to, whether from a hospital or wherever they're coming from, to a nursing home, and it's already been somebody who asked them the exact same questions. And it gets frustrating because the first thing they ask is, didn't you read the chart? Well, that's actually what it's for. And I know that we're used to getting our own information, our own method. It's things that you can come in, you can check to make it more conversational. Like if it says that they're Christian already, you can say your religious faith, you're a Christian. You can kind of confirm it. And if they say different versus coming in as a question, again, because it makes it seem like, what did I answer those initial questions for? And I didn't know the importance of that until I was on the other side and had to watch as many times in one day somebody would ask my husband the exact same thing. And that was my question. Do y'all not talk? Why are we filling out these assessments and having this portability? We're able to use the Portability Act to get my information to you quickly for you to ask me the exact same thing as if you never heard it before. So using it more in a conversational piece of confirming that, okay, this it happened, or even once you ask that question initially on the PHQ-9, if you already have your little, doodle notes that's put together of this resident that you already know that they're having trouble sleeping, even though they answer zero. If in your probing you want to say, I understand in the hospital, it says that you had some trouble sleeping, they may confirm it then. So use that before, use the chart dive before you meet that person, because it's actually going to help you get the stuff done more quickly and more accurately. Does anyone else have anything else? No. Well, if not, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for allowing us to steal a piece of your time, and we just look forward to just moving forward and really capturing and representing our residents in paper form. All right, thank you.
Hey, Cole.
Uh-huh.
Will there be another meeting like next week? My social worker is off today.
Yes. So I have so after this email, administrators, if you
Yeah,
have members that were not on your team
yeah.
present, I'm going to I'm going to add you. If you just email me and say they're not present, I'm going to add you to the next upcoming meetings. And then it's for whoever on your team, for you to forward who is missing from this meeting or who you would like to be on the next meeting. But I also have a meeting tomorrow with
Oh, okay.
Mississippi, Louisiana, and